Now, I'm privileged today to give a brief talk about pearls of wisdom. And as a microbiologist, I've always felt microbes were actually pearls, and you'd be very wise to learn about them because of all that they do. So I'm going to talk about the microbiome. And what is it? Well, it's a community, just like we're a community. But in this case, it's bacteria, fungi, and viruses. And they live on or in our bodies, and there are a lot of them. And many of them are our friends, so they're good. Now, they're also a small group, like plants and animals like to live in certain ecological niches. That's true for the microbes as well. They like to live in certain parts of the body. And so when they cluster together in a certain place, they're called a microbiota. And the gut microbiota is probably one of the biggest because there are more microbes there than any place else in our body. How many do we have? Lots. 39 to 100 trillion bacteria and other microbes versus about 30 million human cells versus the national debt, which is 19.9 trillion. But it's growing, so I'm not sure it won't catch up. But there are a lot of them inside of us, but they don't take up much mass. If you compare human cells, most of ours are red blood cells actually, and compare them to the bacteria, you see there's some more bacteria than human cells, but then you look at their mass. It's very small because microbes are very small. That's micro. That's how it got its name. So 1 to 3% of our body weight is in microbes, but they're very numerous. Now, I'll give you a little taste of history about microbes. Certainly, we made great advances in the 1600s when the microscope was discovered, but then later on, Antoine van Leeuwenhoek developed a compound microscope, and he was the first to describe the fact that if he took scrapings from his teeth versus his feces, the microbes looked very different. So he's actually the father of the microbiome. Then later on, we developed the connection between microbes and disease, and those are the ones you hear the most about. And Louis Pasteur was a true hero during that period of time. Then we got so we could grow them on agar in petri dishes and study them more directly. The biggest advance more recently is the fact that we can study their genetics without ever growing them. And that has truly changed this area a lot. Now, the big question is, what is a normal microbiome? We don't know, basically. This is in the infant stages. It's like Bill was describing. A lot of these are in early stages. But in 2008, the NIH started the Human Microbiome Project. But what scientists are trying to do is create a normal microbiological map for the following tissues. And the GI tract is right at the top. And you understand that because so many microbes live there. But they're studying all these different areas. And then with the new technology, it makes it possible to identify organisms in all of these tissues. And the way that works is if you want to study the gut microbiota, you isolate DNA from the gut, the feces, extract the human DNA, and then we have two sequencing methods here. One tells us exactly what type of species it is, and the other one gives us more information on the whole. And we can identify all these little different microbes that are present in the gut, and in addition, we can identify the abundance of each one. And this will allow us to determine whether you have a normal versus a diseased microbiome once we've established what's normal. And the reason this has worked is a drastic reduction in cost of genetic sequencing. When I first started sequencing viruses, it was hugely expensive, time-consuming, labor-intensive. It was really a lot of hard work. Now you send it to a lab and you get the results the next afternoon, and the cost has gone way, way down. Okay, so what did they do first? Well, they selected 300 healthy subjects, they are Americans, to determine normal microbial composition. What's there? What do you have in your gut? And then they're looking at what they're doing, what biochemical function those particular organisms have, and then how it varies between individuals. Yours is not going to be the same as mine, and mine's not going to be the same as somebody in South America. And this is how they plan to be able to determine the difference between the normal and the disease. Now, what have you got? You have 500 to 2,000 species of bacteria in the human gut. This is a lot of different populations. Now, I've listed the 4 dominant bacteria phyla there, but there are a whole bunch more, and then there are different members of each of those. So it's a very complex environment. It's an ecosystem all to itself. Where do we get it? From birth. When we go through the vaginal canal, we acquire our first microbiome, gut microbiota. That's where we pick up the organisms first, and then they're also present in breast milk. So that's at the very start of life. That's when we pick up a lot of these organisms from our mothers. And then after that, it's who you live with, your family, what you eat, and your environmental. Where do you live? What are you surrounded by? What's happening in your exposure in that regard? So it's multifactorial in that regard. Now, there have been a number of studies already that have shown that the gut microbiota has a profound health effect. And there are many, many studies, and it's getting clearer, but still a lot of it's a little bit difficult at this point to say distinctly what's different. There are 69 different factors from one study that said affected your gut microflora. And I liked the one about chocolate. I thought that one sounded pretty good. So I eat that. But contraceptives, all kinds of different factors that may affect your gut. It may determine whether they live peacefully together or cause disease. The composition and the balance is both. Those are both important. Not just whether you've got it, but the balance between them. What you eat. The Western diet, we have a high intake of red meat, refined sugars, and saturated fats. But we have very little fiber in our diet. And I'm going to talk about that a lot because fiber is very important. Now, also in our guts, our microbes evolve. They don't stay the same. They're just kind of like everything else. It evolves. And the most fascinating evolution is the one in the Japanese population where many eons ago, people started eating the seaweed. And there's a bacteria on the seaweed that knows how to digest seaweed. Well, now the people in Japan have that in their guts. So they can tolerate and enjoy seaweed better than most groups because of that. And that organism evolved to be able to accomplish that. Now, as I said, the balance and the composition are both important, and it may be related to stool shape and consistency. So what your stools look like is very important and is related to the amount of fiber you eat. Now, one of our earlier speakers in this series had a Bristol stool chart. Now, I know this might not be your favorite endeavor, but it's very important to look at your stools because you can see whether they're normal or abnormal. And I'm not going to test you on whether you do or not, but it really is a great idea because it helps you get an idea of whether you're keeping a healthy gut or not. But one of the big things is fiber. It is so good for your gut microbiota. They love it. They really benefit from having fiber. This is the one thing I will emphasize today. I've listed all the benefits which you can read and enjoy, but certainly it helps your bowel movements, bowel health. It's thought to lower cholesterol levels and help control blood sugar and achieve a healthy weight. So fiber is really impacting you in many different ways. And we're fortunate because we know a lot about where we can get fiber. Your best fiber choices are all the grains and the fruits and nuts and seeds, and also drink water. You need to drink water every day. But when they studied and looked at how much fiber Americans were eating, we're eating about half of what we should each day. So fiber is a thing pay attention to in your diet because it does have benefits. And we aren't eating enough, apparently, and it will keep your gut happy. Now, in some cases, your gut misbehaves, and this is called dysbiosis. And this is when you get a microbial imbalance or maladaptation. And this is associated with both intestinal and extraintestinal diseases. And a lot of the intestinal diseases you probably heard about, irritable bowel syndrome, inflammatory bowel disease, celiac disease, all these are direct effects on the gut. However, the biggest studies right now are the extraintestinal disorders. And that's from allergies to obesity, all things in between, all different conditions that we have. There's studies now ongoing to look at how does the gut microbiota affect that. And I'm going to give you an example of what happens when you disrupt this. And is anybody in here never taken an antibiotic? All of us have. We do take antibiotics, and they're wonderful in so many ways, but these are really impacting on the gut. And the numbers, when you take a broad-spectrum antibiotic, it kills a lot of your good gut members. And it's really bad about digesting or having diarrhea. Then you see the antibiotic-associated diarrhea. I imagine most folks in here have experienced that after taking an antibiotic. I certainly have. It can irritate the bowel directly. It can also change the levels of the gut flora or allow pathogenic bacteria to grow. And also, we all know about the increase in antibiotic resistance bacteria. That's a separate issue, which is a huge problem for the world. It's not just the U.S., it's around the world. Now, I'm going to give you the best example of what happens when you take antibiotics. This is an organism called Clostridium difficile. It's normally present in the gut in small numbers. But what happens after you take antibiotics is it increases dramatically, and then it causes severe inflammation and disease. It's not an infrequent disease. There are over 500,000 cases in the U.S. each year, and almost 30,000 people die, and 80% of those people are seniors. Okay? So this is really a tremendous problem in the U.S. and across the world, not just here. So we do have some treatments. The first one is more antibiotics. You get about a 30% cure of the remaining group that wasn't cured. Then the next one is fecal transplants. And this is really working. And the way you do it is you have an individual who's healthy. And so you take feces and you filter out the major portion and save the microbes. And you introduce it into the intestinal tract of the patient who's suffering from Clostridium difficile. And it'll colonize their gut, and then they'll recover. Okay? And it really does work. It's been very effective. It's not one people talk about a lot. One of the big challenges is finding the healthy donors. These people are screened really strictly to get what they call a healthy person. But now that you have the Open Biome Project, which is a nonprofit stool bank, where you can order them, just so you'll know. So how do we introduce this treatment? Well, colonoscopy has been the normal way that's been done for a long time. However, and I love the new phrase for fecal transplantation, transfusion. They have a lot of humor in their materials, but they're starting to put all these into capsules, and they call that crapsules. And that's where they take the microbes and put them in a capsule so you can swallow them, which is a lot cheaper and easier. In addition, they're doing what's called a repopulate, which is capsules that contain specific organisms that they think you need. They grow them specifically and put them in the capsule, and then you can swallow that. But there's a lot of innovation going on here with this technology. But I want to also give you one example of an intestinal problem. Gut bacteria and your heart. There are a lot of studies on the different extraintestinal diseases, But the most important part of the gut is the epithelial cells. And these are the cells lining the intestine, which keep the food and the bacteria in the intestine and don't let it leak into the body. Well, the epithelial cells feed on short-chain fatty acids produced by the bacteria. So the bacteria in your gut are actually feeding your epithelial cells, and that helps keep you healthy. Now, certain foods can change that in a way, and this is one that's been studied a fair amount. When people eat red meat or eggs, they produce a chemical in the liver that's called TMAO. It has a chemical name. And they worry that this contributes to cholesterol buildup in your vessels. And so they're studying microbes to see not only what they do in your gut, but are they having an impact on the rest of your body? Because there's good at increasing evidence, and some of the most interesting right now is obesity. But a lot of diseases and all the allergies we have now, which we didn't used to have so much problem with. So this is a real big area of study that I think that we're going to learn a lot. In addition, bacteria can affect your drugs. A number of people take digoxin. It's for congestive heart failure and atrial fibrillation. And they always knew it was really difficult to figure out how much to give folks, but they didn't know why. But then they discovered that Ergotella lenta in the gut, a bacteria, inactivates the digoxin. So the way they counter that is the high-protein diet will stop and block that action. But that's an organism that's specifically inactivating a drug that people are taking. And there are probably many more that we just don't know yet. But this is an active area of study. So people often are interested, can you enhance your gut microbiota via the foods you eat, via prebiotics and or probiotics? Well, the one I like the best is the prebiotics. These are plant fibers that nourish the good bacteria. They keep the good bacteria healthy, and they're found primarily in fruits and vegetables, many of which I'm sure we all eat. But it's important to keep in mind that this helps keep those good ones going so they stay at a high number and the others don't take over. Because we have pathogens in there too. We have to keep them at a low level. The other one is probiotics, and these are live bacterial cultures. Bacteria that you take in that are still living and then you think will inhabit your intestinal tract. Certainly yogurt is a big one that everybody talks about. Many of us take it after antibiotics to try to reestablish, and there is some value shown with yogurt doing that. Kimchi is a big one, probably more popular here than most places. But I have to tell you that even though you take these probiotics, the other one you take, you can take them in pills, okay? I'm sure there are a number of them out there. They advertise how many different bacteria they have. For example, this one has 10 billion lactobacillus. Okay, remember how many bacteria you have in your gut? Over 30 trillion. So this is kind of a drop in the bucket, so to speak, literally. Most of these, there's not very good evidence that it can establish that organism. Now, they don't think it does any harm, and I've taken them myself, but there's not good evidence that that particular approach will work. So it's better to incorporate the prebiotics, where you keep them healthy to start with. But yogurt does help with antibiotic-induced diarrhea. So, should you have your gut microbiome analyzed? You could. They actually have companies now that you send in a sample of feces, and then they will analyze the proportion of and what type of bacteria are in your gut. It's not very sophisticated at this point, so it's kind of at the beginning area. But I thought, since I'm going to talk a little bit more about this next year in our class, I'm going to have mine analyzed just for fun. And we'll see what we can learn, but this is the new approach. Just like they want everybody to have scans or all these different types of things, the new one is to have your gut microbiome analyzed. So I believe in homework, and I know you'll have next Saturday free. So I want you to think a lot about what you're feeding your gut microbiota, and particularly, are you giving it enough fiber to keep it healthy? And look at your stools. And I want you to read the articles that you're going to see about the microbiome, because you're going to keep seeing more and more about this, about the importance of it and how they are studying the impact of the microbiome, not only on your intestinal tract, but on your whole body. And then I put a TED Talk in there for you about food for thought, how your belly controls your brain. And in conclusion, microbes rule. Please keep that in mind. Mahalo.